Hello, and thank you for watching this video. Today, I'm going to talk about using EBX5 to manage reference data, specifically industry classification codes. What standards are we going to look at today? We're looking at these four sets of reference data: NAICS, SIC, ISAC, GICS. These are all good examples of public reference data. By public, we mean reference data that is coming from a third party, not your company. Examples of reference data that comes from your company, that's private reference data. Those are things like organizational hierarchies, chart of accounts, financial accounts. That's private reference data. But in this case, this is all public reference data. It comes from governments, it comes from international organizations like the UN, and also private organizations like MSCI. What are some of the challenges you face when managing reference data? Well, we like to bucket them into two categories. You have implementation and maintenance, and then application, or how do I use reference data. On the implementation side, you've got questions such as, how do I support the different structures of each one of these standards? How do I manage and govern this data? How do I deal with change over time? How do I support non-Latin character sets? This is especially important if you have overseas operations that want to use the same structure but don't want to use the same labels. Then there's the application side, or how do I use the reference data? And this is really about mapping the standard to other standards, and about mapping the standard, or a version of the standard, to other versions. So connecting NAICS 2002 to NAICS 2007. Creating custom versions of the standard without getting out of sync with the public version. And then finally, I think the most interesting part, connecting that reference data to other kinds of master data. Now, I think this is the fun part. And frankly, it's the point of maintaining reference data. We manage reference data like industry codes so we can have consistent industry attributes for our customers, prospects, and market segments. And, of course, we want to use it to create hierarchies. So with that, let's take a look at EBX. Here's EBX. If you're unfamiliar with our product, check out our 3-minute video on our website. It covers the tabs you see at the top of the screen. I'm going to open up my data spaces and see what packages I have access to. And as you can see, I've got access to GICS, ISIC, NAICS, different versions of NAICS, and SIC. And each one of these packages is separate from each other. And the nice thing about this is that because they're isolated, you can have each standard managed by its own distinct team. It's very useful. But let's take a look at the 2012 version of NAICS. And here we are. I'm in the 2012 data space within the NAICS data space, and I'm in the NAICS 2012 data set. And what I see here is I see the various components of NAICS, the sector, subsector, industry group, industry, and national industry tables. And then I'm in the national industry table, and I'm looking at all the data. So I see the first 100 records or so, and there's about 1,065 records here. And I get this nice, very flat, Excel-like view. And I'm sure you're asking yourself, how did I get all this data into EBX? Well, it just so happens that the U.S. Census Bureau publishes the NAICS codes on their website in Excel. And EBX, well, we have an Excel add-on that allows you to import directly from Excel, but it also comes with a variety of ways of importing data. And one of those ways is to import from flat files and also XML. And then finally, if you want to use data services or ETL, we also work with those systems to get data into EBX. Now, of course, if you've worked with the standard before, you know that this might look flat, but it's actually not flat at all. There's actually a hierarchy inside NAICS. And so let's go look at a particular entry. Let's look at, here we are, solar electric power generation. And here in this detailed record, you can see all the relationships that are defined in the data model. These little chain icons represent different relationships that I have. And if we click on this little preview button here, this allows me to jump to or take a look at that relationship it has with industry group. One other thing to note is that if you look carefully at this number, 221114, you can see that these relationships are actually computed, because all I need to do is take the first 2 characters and I get the sector, the next 3 and get subsector, etc. So now that we have these relationships, you can see them right here on the screen. What can we do with them? Well, the nice thing about relationships is that you can use them to create hierarchies. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this off so you can look at the whole set again. And I'm going to use my pre-built hierarchy here. And what do we see? Well, now instead of seeing that flat table-like view, I actually see the hierarchy. And we can drill down into electric power generation and we can see solar. Well, there it is. So I can see who its peers are. I can see what are the peers of its industry. And then I can also see what its peers are of the industry group. Having a hierarchical view is great for helping you understand how these different national industries relate to each other. But it's also great when you start to look at this hierarchy and compare it to, say, another hierarchy. Like in this case, looking at ISIC. And how does it deal with electric power, and what say, class, or in this case, sector does it put it in? Or looking at SIC, which is the progenitor to NAICS, and where does it stick electric services, and which sector does it put it in? Now, just eyeballing these hierarchies is, not that great. But what if we could actually connect these different standards and understand how do they actually relate to each other? So if I was looking at data that was coded as down here, 4911 electric service, electric power distribution, if it was coded that, how does that connect to solar? Can I see that? And you can with EBX. So how do we do this? Well, lucky for us, the U.S. Census Bureau has actually published a series of concordance tables, and they define how these different standards relate to each other. Not just how these different standards relate to other standards, so here's 2007 and how it relates to ISIC, but also how these standards relate to each other. So 2007 NAICS 2012, or 2002 to 2007. But you notice these are all pairwise combinations, and you can actually see that when you open up the spreadsheet. And one of the things that you see is that, and it says right here at the top, that in some cases I had a join, and that meant that multiple codes from 2002 became a single code in 2007. In other cases, you had a fork in the sense that a single code in 2002 became multiple codes in 2007. And as a side point, that's actually why just doing a simple delta between the versions of these industry standards is not always appropriate. What do I mean by that? Well, let's actually look at a comparison of NAICS 2012 to NAICS 2007, and you'll literally see the forks and joins in the comparison, in the deltas. So I'm going to pull up 2012, and I'm going to go ahead and run the compare, and I'm going to compare 2012 to 2007, because that's what we're looking at in the spreadsheet. And what we'll see here is these little icons here indicate that something has changed, and if we go to national industry, what we can see is we can see that these codes here, because of the plus, this means that they are new. This has been added in 2012, but they do not exist in 2007. And if we go to the back here, what do we see? Well, these are the codes that were subtracted. These are things that exist in 2007 that don't exist in 2012. Now, if we look at one of these codes, let's take a look at this one right here. Now, game, toy, and children's vehicle manufacturing. I don't know what children's vehicle is, but did game, toy, and children's vehicle manufacturing as an industry disappear from NAICS? Or, as I pointed out in the concordance table, was it merged into some new code in 2012? Just looking at the deltas, which is a common thing that you get from most MDM platforms, just looking at the deltas doesn't actually tell you what happened to the code. And this is problematic if you're dealing with a lot of transactional data in your systems and you've got some things coded as children's toy vehicle manufacturing. What if it's coded there? Well, what happened to that code? Where did it go? What's the new code? And you can solve that with EBX, and let me show you how. So here I have the data from the concordance table directly from Census. It's NAICS 2007, NAICS 2012. And let's find our good friend children's vehicle manufacturing. And here it is. And so right off the bat, yep, there it is. This is the entry directly from Census. Game, toy, and children's vehicle manufacturing. It became doll, toy, and game manufacturing. Now, if you remember from a previous, a couple minutes ago when I talked about these detail screens, you'll notice that these little icons are here. These are chain icons. So I'm not just storing the value here. I'm actually storing this value as a foreign key relationship back to NAICS 2007. So I'm actually going back and hooking this crosswalk table to this data set, and in this data set, specifically this national industry table. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, what it means is that I can use all the relationships that NAICS 2007 has, and I can create a hierarchy. So let's take a look at what that hierarchy might look like. Let's remove all, and I've got it already pre-created. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a NAICS 2007 to NAICS 2012 crosswalk hierarchy, and here it is. And let's go find children's vehicle again. And there it is. So we can see the hierarchy, and we can see that game, toy, and children's vehicle manufacturing in 2012 is now 339930, or doll, toy, and game manufacturing. If we remove that and we look for one of the previous things we looked at earlier, which was solar power generation, well, here's the 2007 version. And where's solar power generation? Well, solar power generation is a child of electric power generation, which means that this particular national industry was forked and it became all these industries. So just by using the relationships that I have inside NAICS 2007 and hooking this crosswalk table to it, I now have a hierarchy that shows me what happened to that field and how does it relate to its progenitor. And so here I can see a fork, basically. Now, not only can I look at it from 2007 to 2012, I could reverse it. I could look at it as 2012 to 2007, so going back into utilities and going back into electric power generation. I can see I've got solar electric power generation, wind, geothermal, biomass, other. And then, of course, when we click on this other thing here, we can see that its child, other electric power generation, that was the progenitor that came from 2007. That's what 2012 descends from. So you can see that, say, reversed relationship. Now, this is one way of looking at the data. This is just using the simple fact that I've hooked my crosswalk table, NAICS 2007-2012, to the national industry table in the 2007 version of the data and the 2012 version of the data. Now, going back and looking specifically at children's vehicle manufacturing, can we do anything else with these relationships? Within EBX, we can create another kind of relationship called a selection node. And with the selection node, we don't have a direct foreign key relationship between the two tables, but what we're doing is we're using values found on this particular record to search or look up on other tables. So for example, we know that this NAICS 2002 to 2007 table has NAICS 2007 information in it, but I don't want to create a relationship between NAICS 2002 and 2007 to the NAICS 2007-2012. So what can I do? Here's a selection node. We're going to look up in this table what matches this value here, the 339932. Click on this, and there we are. We pull up this value, and you can see that NAICS 2002, the NAICS code didn't change. Now, I can also use that information to look up in other tables, like down over here, NAICS 2007 to ISIC revision 4, and I could find out, well, what ISIC revision 4 codes match the NAICS 2007 code for game, toy, and children's vehicle manufacturing. We click on that, and what do we find? What we find here is that multiple ISIC 4 codes match the NAICS 2007 codes. You know, and of course, I'm sure you know that because the information in the NAICS 2007 to ISIC table, if we look in here, it's actually not stored as just values, but also relationships back to ISIC 4 and NAICS 2007. Naturally, what that means is that we can take a look at a hierarchy that shows me the ISIC hierarchy, and then as I drill down, it could show me, okay, at the lowest level, what's the corresponding NAICS fields? Or if I want to look at the opposite direction, which is NAICS to ISIC, you know, what's the corresponding ISIC field at that lowest level? So here's the ISIC fields for mining and hard coal, crude petroleum, natural gas for this particular NAICS ID. The selection nodes just don't act as a fancy lookup. You can also use them to create multi-table views. What do I mean by that? I can use these selection nodes to view the combination of these two tables. So here I am, when what I've done is I've used a selection node to combine NAICS 2002 to 2007 with 7 to 2012, so I get that nice 3-period view. So if I'm looking at data across 2002, 2007, and 2012, I can understand the evolution all on one page, and if I really, really want to, I can also export this out to Excel. But so when we look at, let's go back and look at that solar power thing, what you can see on the screen here is you can literally see the fork in action. So no fork, no fork. Oh, and look over here, 2012. Yes, big fork. Big fork because all these different industries were created for 2012, solar, wind, geothermal, and biomass. Up until now, what I've shown you are things that we believe that every RDM/MDM system should do. And you know, if your RDM or master data management system doesn't handle these things, maybe it's not a very good MDM platform. But what are some of those things? Well, one is this ability, like I showed you here, this ability to handle these cross-temporal or multi-temporal relationships and enforce referential integrity across them. Another was to deal with the multiple or the diversity of different data models that we have. Build those hierarchies, have the ability to create hierarchies that do things that actually cut across time periods, not just basic hierarchies, but also these cross-temporal hierarchies. And then I showed you briefly a little bit about change management. How do these different standards compare across time? Now, when I was thinking about like what are some other things to show, I was looking at the information on the UN's website, the ISIC page. And I'm like reading it and I'm downloading the data, and I noticed that they have the ISIC in Chinese. And then it occurred to me that a lot of our customers have an internationalization issue. What do I mean by that? What it means is that they've got overseas operations, they've got customers, and they're receiving information in non-Latin character sets. So they just need to manage those non-Latin characters. But there's actually a little bit more to it than just, can I just represent the data in some other language other than English or French or German? But there's a secondary problem, which is that what if I have, and in this case it's very clear, I have the same hierarchy, but the labels are changing. And that's all I have. And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to create a copy of my English hierarchy and then update it with Chinese and then have to update that Chinese hierarchy every time my English hierarchy changes. Well, luckily for us, within EBX, we have a feature called inherited data sets that does just that. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So if we go to the ISIC data, and here I am, this is the ISIC revision for data space, and here I am in the revision for English data set. We have the ISIC, this is the nice little hierarchy that we get from the UN. So A, basically everything was 0, 1, and 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 3, 0, 1, 4, all the way down to 3 belongs to basically class A, right? So nice hierarchy, we've seen this before, not that interesting. Now if we wanted to implement this in some other systems, what I would do, if we want to implement this for China, what I would do is I would create a copy, rewrite the whole thing. Now I've got 2 copies, which means that if I update the English version, if I decide to move, say let's move this node from A to B and back and forth again, then that means I need to update my Chinese version. So if I'm updating the Chinese version, and then there's the traditional Chinese version and the German version, the French version, it's a lot of updating. It's a lot of places for things to fall down. So with inherited data sets, what you're doing is you're creating a child data set that inherits, and you choose what it inherits. By default, it inherits the parents' values and relationships. But once you have this child data set, you can choose what you want to inherit. So in this case, if you look, what I have is I have that same ISIC structure, and all I've done is I've overwritten the English language values with traditional Chinese, that's not traditional, it's actually simplified Chinese, but simplified Chinese values. And because they're inherited, all I'm doing is, these aren't copies, this is actually an inherited data, so it has a relationship. It means that if I decide to go back to the English language version, I can click on this little inherit or disinherit button and return to the original English language version. So what this also means is that if at some point in the future the UN decides that fishing and aquaculture actually should belong to arts, entertainment, and recreation, because I've been fishing, it's actually a lot of fun. We can move that node. Let's move it down into arts, entertainment, and recreation. Okay. So if I move that node down to there, so R now has 3, when I go to my Chinese data set, it automatically absorbs that particular change. Well, how do I know that's actually fishing? Well, if I go back into here and I disinherit the value, I can see the original English language value, and that's English fishing and aquaculture. Go back to my Chinese version. So this is one way that we deal with internationalization, and this is one way that you can have multiple versions of the same hierarchy in different languages. So in this case, what we're saying is we're keeping the same hierarchy, but we're just changing the different labels. But like I said, the inherited data sets don't have to inherit the values, and in this case I'm overwriting the name value with Chinese. You can also choose to overwrite relationships, so I can change which particular section does 3 correspond to. And what that means is that I can create an entirely different ISIC, say around my sales territories or my sales management team. So for example, in this case, what I did is I created an entirely different view of ISIC where the sections actually are now related to or children of somebody that runs that particular sales group. Now remember, I put fishing and aquaculture down here in R. And if we look, my fishing and aquaculture still has a relationship with the parent. And so what does that mean? That means that if I choose to go into fishing and aquaculture here in the parent version of ISIC and move this node back to where it ought to be, which is in A rather than in R. Put it back here, so now it's A3. That means that not only will my Chinese version, so if we go back in here, hey, 3's not there anymore. Where's 3? It's back to where I expect. 3 is back under A. My Chinese version and my customized sales version have 3 back where it ought to belong under group A, or class A, I should say. So that's part of the value of having these inherited data sets. The idea is that I can customize the labels, I can customize relationships, I can create relationships that better fit my business. But at the same time, for those things that I choose to continue to inherit, those changes made to the parent class, and that's going to be up here in Vision 4, will flow through to all the children and update them. Up to now, I've shown you a few things that we believe that every reference data management system should do. So those are things such as map between versions, or do that intertemporal mapping, intertemporal hierarchy creation, map to other kinds of reference data standards, so mapping between NAICS and ISIC, doing things like foreign language adaptations. These are all things that every RDM system, whatever you choose, should do. Now, the entertaining thing about reference data, especially when it comes down to industry coding, is when we start to apply it to things like accounts. So in this case, I've switched over to the client accounts data space, and I'm in the accounts data set. And here I have General Electric, and this is General Electric, and it's like 5,000 children. And within General Electric, this is actually modeled after the Salesforce account entry. You can see that we have 2 entries here, one for SIC code and one for NAICS. And as you've seen before, this little chain icon means that this is a reference to the NAICS tables, which means that I have the ability to take this current view, which is more of the simple parent-child view, so we can go down, n number of levels to show all the different children for GE. Take that view, and instead of looking at it by legal parent, let's look at it by NAICS 2007. So if I'm looking at NAICS 2007, I go through here, I can drill down electric power generation, and then I see all the companies that have been coded as electric power generation. Or, because we have access to the crosswalk, view that by NAICS 2002. So again, I have something here where I can view all of the different companies that have been listed as having other electric power generation as their code. And then the last thing is to actually show you what it looks like when we move to NAICS 2012. Now you'll notice something interesting here. The interesting thing here is that under electric power generation, in 2012, remember that it was refactored, and so we have a fork because the other electric power generation national industry became solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and other, and it changed the code. So when we look under here, because my counts table is not using the 2012 version, it's using the 2007 version, and it's not sure what the 2007 code became. So it knows that the code evolved to one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 codes. What it's done is it's put the same companies with that same code underneath every single one of these entries, just in case somebody who is looking at this from a 2012 perspective wants to see what are all the companies that could possibly be under solar, wind, geothermal, because it was unclear when this code change happened. So that's it for today's video. I believe we covered quite a few of the topics on the implementation and maintenance side and quite a few on the application side. In our next video, we're going to change gears a little bit. We're going to focus on location reference data, so specifically the ISO 3166 country codes, CBSA, MSA, or the Census Bureau organizations within the United States. And then we'll look at kind of bucketing clients by location. And in that particular video, we're going to cover more about governance. So how do you develop or create workflows that organize the individuals who are responsible for making the updates, keeping the data up to date, organize those individuals and coordinate their activities with those that are accountable, or the people that need to review those changes and updates. And with that, thank you for watching our video, and certainly if you have any comments, please feel free to email us. Have a great day.